Alright, gather round because this isn't some cozy cabin in the woods tale. Have you ever been truly alone? I mean really alone, surrounded by miles of nothing but trees and silence so thick it feels like it's pressing down on you? And have you ever wondered what else is out there in that silence, watching you, maybe hungering for you? Because up in the northern Minnesota woods last winter, we found out the hard way that some legends aren't just stories whispered around a campfire. Some legends are real and some legends haunt. We were a crew of 10, maybe 12 at the start, logging a remote section of state forest land north of Ely, Minnesota. Winter logging, tough work, brutally cold, but the pay was good and the woods were thick with timber. Name's Jake, by the way, been logging since I was knee-high to a stump. We were a mix of guys, some veterans, some greenhorns, all tough as nails, or so we thought. Our camp was basic, a cluster of heated tents, a mess hall, generator shed, and a garage for the skidders and trucks. Nothing fancy but enough to keep us going through the winter. The unusual feature of this particular logging site wasn't the camp itself, it was the location. Deep in the Superior National Forest, miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a rutted logging road that turned to ice and snow by November. We were isolated, cut off, surrounded by miles and miles of old-growth forest, the kind that swallows sound and sunlight both. And it was winter. Minnesota winter, which meant relentless cold, deep snow, and days that felt like they lasted only a few hours before the long, dark nights set in. The woods in winter, especially those deep woods, they have a different feel. Empty, still, almost watchful. Our crew was a rough bunch, but we mostly got along. There was Old Man Finn, our foreman, grizzled and quiet, knew the woods like the back of his hand. Then there was Big Tony, the skidder operator, loud, always cracking jokes, trying to keep spirits up. Mikey, young kid, fresh out of logging school, eager but still wet behind the ears. And then there was Silas, the quietest of the lot, a Native American guy from up north, Ojibwe, I think. He kept to himself, didn't say much, but he was a damn good logger. He always seemed to be listening to something we couldn't hear, watching something we couldn't see. The inciting incident, the first crack in the ice, was the silence. Not the normal wood silence, the kind you get used to. This was different. It started a few weeks into the job, after the first heavy snowfall. The usual sounds of the forest, the wind in the pines, the rustle of animals, even the distant drone of our own machinery, started to fade. It was like the woods were absorbing sound, swallowing it whole. The silence became heavier, thicker, almost oppressive. And then there were the tracks. We found them one morning, fresh in the snow around the edge of camp. Big, too big for a deer, too wide for a wolf, and definitely not bear. They were vaguely human-shaped, but distorted, elongated, with claw marks at the end, not paws but claws. They circled the camp, just at the edge of the treeline, like something was pacing, observing. We gathered around them, boots crunching in the snow, staring down at the strange tracks. Big Tony let out a nervous laugh. "Bigfoot tracks, boys. Looks like we got a Sasquatch checking us out." Everyone chuckled, trying to play it off, but there was a nervous edge to the laughter. Old Man Finn knelt down, examining the tracks closely, his brow furrowed. He traced one of the claw marks with a gloved finger. "Ain't no bear, Tony. Ain't no Bigfoot neither." He stood up, his gaze sweeping the dark woods surrounding the camp. Something wrong about these tracks. Silas, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the group, spoke up for the first time that morning. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the nervous chatter. "Wendigo tracks." The word hung in the air, heavy as the winter sky. Wendigo. The Native American legend, the spirit of winter famine, the creature of insatiable hunger, said to stalk the deep woods, especially in winter. Most of us dismissed it as just that, a legend, a story. But Silas's voice, the way he said it, the look in his eyes, it wasn't just a story to him. Big Tony scoffed. "Wendigo. Come on, Silas, you don't believe in that stuff, do you? That's just old wives' tales." Silas just shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the tracks. "Some stories are true stories, Tony. Some things you don't want to believe in, but they still real." The rising tension was a slow burn at first, like the embers of a dying fire, smoldering beneath the surface. We tried to ignore the tracks, to dismiss Silas's words as superstition. We went back to work, felling trees, skidding logs, trying to focus on the job. But the silence persisted, heavier than ever. And the feeling of being watched, that grew stronger. We started seeing things out of the corner of our eyes. Flashes of movement in the trees, dark shapes flitting between the pines, just at the edge of our vision. When we turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Just the silent, watchful woods. The temperature seemed to drop even lower, an unnatural cold that seeped through our layers of clothing, chilling us to the bone. The wind, when it blew, carried a strange, icy breath, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind sighing through the branches, but then, clearer, more distinct. Whispers that seemed to carry words, though we couldn't quite make them out. Words that sounded hungry. Mikey, the young kid, was the first to crack. He started jumping at shadows, flinching at every sound, his eyes wide and bloodshot from lack of sleep. He kept saying he heard things, whispers in the wind, voices calling his name, even when no one was around. We tried to reassure him, told him it was just cabin fever, the isolation getting to him. But we were starting to feel it too. The unease, the paranoia, the sense of something unseen closing in. Then the equipment started acting up. Skidders stalled for no reason, chainsaws jammed, generators sputtered and died. Mark, our mechanic, swore it was sabotage, that someone was messing with the machines. But there was no sign of tampering, no logical explanation for the malfunctions. It was like the machines themselves were resisting, breaking down under some unseen pressure. The food started to run low. Supply trucks were delayed by the heavy snow, roads becoming impassable. Rations were cut, tempers frayed. Hunger gnawed at us, not just physical hunger but a deeper, more primal hunger fueled by fear and isolation. We started snapping at each other, arguments erupting over small things, suspicion and mistrust growing between us. One night, the generator died completely. Plunged the camp into absolute darkness, except for the faint glow of the kerosene lanterns. The silence was deafening. The cold intensified. And the whispers, they became louder, closer, swirling around the tents just outside the canvas walls. We huddled in the mess hall tent, lanterns casting flickering shadows that danced and writhed on the canvas. Fear was a tangible thing in the air, thick and suffocating. Big Tony, usually the jokester, was pale and silent, his eyes darting nervously around. Even Old Man Finn looked shaken, his face grim, his usual stoicism cracked. Silas sat quietly in a corner, staring into the flickering lantern light, his expression unreadable. Someone finally asked him, voice trembling, "Silas, what is it? What's out there?" Silas looked up slowly, his eyes dark and deep, reflecting the lantern light like pools of black water. "Wendigo," he said again, his voice low and steady, no longer a whisper but a statement of fact. "It's hungry. Winter hunger. It's been watching us. Waiting. But what does it want?" Mikey stammered, his voice barely audible. Silas's gaze shifted to Mikey, his eyes holding a chilling intensity. "It wants what Wendigos always want," he said. "It wants to feed." The climax came that night. The generator remained dead. The lanterns burned low, casting long, dancing shadows. The wind howled outside, a mournful, keening sound that seemed to echo the whispers, amplifying them, bringing them closer. Closer than ever. We were all huddled in the mess hall, trying to stay warm, trying to stay awake, listening to the storm rage outside, listening to the whispers that seemed to be circling the tent, like predators circling prey. Suddenly, a sound cut through the wind and the whispers. A scream. A blood-curdling scream that tore through the night, followed by a sickening thud, and then silence. Silence, except for the wind, the whispers, and the pounding of our own hearts. We froze, paralyzed by terror, listening, straining to hear over the storm. The scream had come from outside the mess hall, from the direction of the sleeping tents. Old Man Finn, despite his fear, was the first to react. He grabbed a lantern, his hand shaking, and moved towards the tent flap. "Stay here," he growled, his voice rough. "Stay together. I'll check it out." He pushed open the flap and stepped out into the storm. We waited, huddled together, hearts pounding, listening to the wind howl, listening to the whispers, listening for any sound from Finn. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then another sound. Not a scream this time, but a different sound. A crunching sound. Like bones breaking. Followed by a wet, tearing sound. And then, silence again. Big Tony couldn't take it anymore. He jumped up, grabbed a lantern and pushed past us towards the tent flap. "Finn!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. "Finn, what's going on out there?" He stumbled out into the storm, disappearing into the darkness. We waited again, huddled tighter, fear squeezing the air from our lungs. More minutes crawled by. Then another sound. A low, guttural growl coming from outside the tent. A sound that was not human, not animal, but something else. Something ancient, something hungry, something terrifyingly close. Mikey started whimpering, tears streaming down his face. "It's here," he sobbed. "It's going to get us. We're all going to die." Silas, who had been silent all this time, finally stood up. He looked at us, his eyes calm, almost resigned. "It's feeding," he said, his voice flat. "It's feeding on them." The growling outside intensified, closer now, just outside the tent walls. The canvas bulged inwards as if something heavy was pressing against it. The whispers became a deafening chorus, swirling around the tent, inside our minds, filling us with a primal terror that stripped away all pretense of civilization, leaving us naked, vulnerable, prey. The twist wasn't a sudden turn of events, but a chilling realization. As the growling intensified, as the canvas tent strained and bulged, as the whispers roared in our minds, we realized what the Wendigo really was. It wasn't just a monster in the woods, a creature of flesh and blood. It was something else, something more. The Wendigo wasn't just hunting us for food. It was hunting us for something else. It was hunting for our fear, our hunger, our despair. It was feeding on our souls, on the darkness within us, on the very things that made us human or perhaps unmade us. The Wendigo wasn't just a creature of winter hunger. It was winter hunger. It was the embodiment of starvation, of isolation, of the cold, desolate heart of the wilderness. It wasn't just stalking us in the woods. It was stalking us inside our own minds, feeding on our fear, amplifying our paranoia, turning us against each other, driving us to the brink of madness and beyond. As the canvas ripped open, torn apart by something unseen, as the icy wind howled into the tent, carrying the guttural growls and the deafening whispers, we saw it. Not in a clear, defined form, but as a shifting, indistinct shape in the darkness, a towering figure of shadow and snow, with eyes that burned with a cold, inhuman light. And we understood. There was no escape. Not from the Wendigo in the woods, and not from the Wendigo within ourselves. I don't know what happened to Mikey and the others in the tent that night. I ran. I don't know why or how, but I ran. Into the storm, into the darkness, into the woods, away from the camp, away from the growling, away from the whispers, running blindly, desperately, fueled by pure animal terror. I ran until I collapsed, exhausted, frozen, lost in the endless snow-covered woods. I lay there for hours or maybe days, I don't know. The cold seeped into my bones, hunger gnawed at my stomach, despair filled my soul. And the whispers, they followed me. Even in the deepest silence of the woods, I could still hear them. Hunger, cold, alone, ears. I was found days later by a search party, half frozen, delirious, barely alive. The camp, they found what was left of it. Destroyed, ripped apart like it had been hit by a tornado or something far worse. Of the others, nothing. No bodies, no remains, nothing but tracks in the snow. Wendigo tracks, leading away from the camp, deeper into the woods. They say I was the only survivor. But sometimes I wonder, did I really survive? Or did something else come back with me from those woods? Because even now, years later, I still feel the cold. I still hear the whispers. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see a hunger in my eyes. A deep woods hunger. A Wendigo hunger. Have you ever been truly hungry? Not just for food, but for something more? Have you ever felt the cold seep into your soul, the silence press down on you, the whispers start to surround you? Share your stories, your experiences, because I have a feeling those woods are still out there, silent, watchful, waiting for winter to come again. And I have a feeling the Wendigo is still hungry. And maybe it's closer than we think.